Hey, good morning.
Hello, hello.
Good morning.
How are you fellas this morning?
I'm feeling a little abandoned.
Right?
No, I'm just kidding.
Oh, man. Jeff, how are you and yours feeling today? Can you give us an update?
Yeah, everything's good. 6 days later, we have grandchild number 4, which is awesome. So Morgan and Jade and Micah and Jackson all doing well, and same thing for Emma and Jacob and Evie and Judah. He's a whole over a week old now. It's he's
Old news.
He's old news. Yeah, no,
He
they're
got
all
right
doing
off the front page.
So
Yep.
he was the baby in the family for 6 days.
I know. Then he got booted out. No, they're all doing well. So just recovering and resting and kind of sticking to family, which is good. The 4 of them together, which is awesome. So yeah, everything's well. We got to see them. I guess Friday, both of them Friday, which was good. So
Was it weird not going up to the hospital and waiting?
yeah, it is. Melinda and I talked about that a little bit. When we were all having kids, you had 30 people in the waiting room, and it was all there. But yeah, it was a little weird. We had Jackson the night before because Morgan's water broke when she was at work, so we had Jackson, and then they were up there, and we were just kind of getting updates through the phone. So I probably woke up every 30 minutes to
Check.
yeah, Micah was making fun of me because when he texted it around 3 a.m. or so, I think Emma responded almost immediately because she was up with Judah. And 20, 30 minutes later, I responded, and he was saying, "What is Jeff up so early for?" Well, he will learn, when as he has a girl now that
it is different. There is a different dynamic with daughters and sons, not better or worse, but it is different. And I'm very thankful, I had the opportunity of experiencing both. I count that as a privilege.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
Cody, everyone else has figured it out, so you must have not given StreamYard permission. Aren't you like a technical guy? Don't you work with computers and stuff for like a fiber internet company?
What is it
he's saying that he gave StreamYard permission to use his name, so it shouldn't say Facebook user. But it's kind of like
maybe StreamYard just doesn't want to admit a relationship.
Well, it's like when one of my kids comes, something happens, and one of my kids comes by, and they're like, "Well, I did X, Y, and Z." I'm like, "You can't have done X, Y, and Z, or this would have happened." There we go.
Confession.
Oh, I was supposed to push this button.
I'm just kidding, buddy. I know I may need to look at it because I know other people have had issues. So,
well, it was interesting. I commented Wednesday, and I came up as Facebook user. So,
well,
I'm gonna kind of, there may be an issue there, Cody. So I'm gonna.
Yeah,
you're not a complete idiot.
I think one of the issues might be every now and then we have to reconnect StreamYard to our Facebook platforms because Facebook's always weird about stuff. So, I mean, Jimmy's had to do this too. I mean, every few weeks it's like we have to reconnect. So I wonder if every time we have to reconnect, you have to go back and re-allow it permission, something like that.
Yeah,
I wouldn't be surprised.
Good morning.
Technology's great when it works. So,
is this the "can you hear me now" part of the internet?
What about now? Well, our announcement won't be as exciting as a fourth grandchild, but today should be the day that we find out the results of our tests, and we feel fine. We've monitored our temperature and all that, so we're very optimistic of the outcome.
Mm-hmm.
I will be stunned if it's anything less, than what we expect. So,
and then your Rona XL will be over.
Yeah.
And I am volunteering to stay away from church this morning so I can see my new grandchildren. So Melinda and I will watch from the house.
Man, how selfish is he?
Hey, that's the way it goes, man.
Hey, now he called me and very graciously. Obviously, he didn't have to ask permission or anything, but he wanted to make sure I was okay. So he covered all his bases. Good morning, Cassie. Congrats on the new house. And she's got a new job. I don't know if I can announce it or not. So Cassie, if that's public knowledge, then we can mention that later. And we'll just assume that Facebook users always quoting one of my favorite movies, to be honest. It's Aaron Sorkin written. It was a play first. I love A Few Good Men. I could watch that movie, anytime. And I'm not a big Tom Cruise fan. I don't, he's all right in the Mission Impossible movies, but I love that movie. I mean, Jack Nicholson really does it. What are your
down movies? Every time Apollo 13, I know, Jimmy, that one's yours too. Apollo 13 or The Martian comes on, I'm watching it.
So I have 3 movies, and I'm not saying these are my 3 favorite movies or the 3 best movies.
And anything Lord of Rings,
yeah,
I'm just watching.
So there's 3 movies that if I see it on the television, I will stop and watch it every single time. Again, I'm not saying these are the top 3 movies or my top 3 movies, but it's A Few Good Men, Anchorman, and Groundhog Day. I'll watch those movies if they're on. I don't care where they're at in the story because they're pretty easy to, I'll just watch the rest of it. Oh, okay. So here we go. So Cassie, I was told she has a new position. She is the RN at Rafa.
Yes.
So she took that position. So that's exciting. I know she's very excited to be doing that. So we've got another ALF connection to Rafa. They just keep growing.
Yeah, and Cassie, as a board member of Rafa, I will welcome you to the team. So I was excited to hear about that.
If it was a for-profit organization, we could slowly do a hostile takeover.
That's right.
But, see, Jeff, I don't know which movie showed me that movie for the first time. I don't know which one. I'm assuming he meant Groundhog Day or A Few Good Men. I don't know. Who could be?
That's what you had mentioned first, and then that came up while you were talking.
I actually have Apollo 13 in my DVR. That's
a great movie. I mean, that was one of the first kind of like adult movies that my dad let me watch because he loved that one. So I've seen Apollo 13 probably 100 times too. And it was funny because as a kid, you don't know who all these actors are. That was probably the first Tom Hanks movie I'd ever seen. So and then as you get older and you watch it again, you're like, oh my gosh, there's all these people. It was Kevin Bacon. I don't know who Kevin Bacon was. There's Tom Hanks. All these people. So it is pretty funny.
That's it. I don't know. Just when you get old enough to understand what all that entailed and just how incredible a task that was. And I think one of my there's 2 parts in that movie that just is when everyone's starting to freak out. And he goes, calm down. We're not going to spend 5 minutes bouncing off the walls just to come back right where we are. And I love when the engineer walks in, he goes, we need to make one of these out of this.
Oh, yeah.
And that's just – I think of my father every time I see that because that's my dad. We can make one of these out of this, and so.
Great movie.
You guys following the pictures coming back from Mars?
Oh, yeah. It's amazing.
That's amazing. Cool stuff.
I tell you, that whole process, I don't know. My mind, if the Lord tarries his return and if we don't wipe each other out, what can the human mind comprehend? I mean, we really don't know. And if we all could pull the wagon the same direction, there'd be absolutely endless possibilities. But
if they need some dead weight or something on one of those missions, I'd go, man.
Jeff would go and leave us in heartbeat.
I'd sit in the back of that thing and just.
Well, I don't know if you guys are aware, but a very rich individual has purchased 4 seats on a SpaceX flight and has donated them to what's the children's hospital? St. Jude's. And you can go make a donation to St. Jude's of any amount, and your name goes in the drawing.
Oh, okay. I thought they were sending kids.
No.
That makes more sense.
No. So you could win a ride on SpaceX.
Jeff would do that in a heartbeat.
St. Jude's is awesome. So it could be a win-win.
Kiss those grandbabies goodbye and off to Mars.
Yeah.
There goes Pop.
There it goes.
I do. I did want to mention. I know Samuel's got a surgery upcoming, so I'm assuming that's what his prayer request is for. So, you pray for him.
Pray for him. I know Debbie asked earlier to pray for my brother Jim. So if y'all would do that, we'd appreciate it.
Jeff donates immediately.
Morning, buddy.
Morning, buddy. Buddy's on the YouTube. Good job, buddy.
Look at that.
So do we have is that like one prayer and then this is like 3 prayers? Is there like a level, or is that like intensity?
Yeah.
Well, I think it's pray for me, and then it goes up by how much they really, really want you to do it.
Oh, gotcha.
Maybe that's what it is.
Melinda likes her some.
He does.
Yep. Some Harrison Ford. Get off my plane.
Yep.
Good morning. Good morning. Man, the Facebook side, they're real active today.
Yeah.
They've had their coffee.
So did you guys get any shake, rattle, and roll out of that storm? What was it? Wednesday, Thursday? Something like that?
It kept waking me up, and then it would set off the baby monitor. So then I kept thinking CJ was waking up, and then CJ did wake up. And so I got like no sleep. And then I went to get the kids for school, and Harley was like, "Oh, the storm was so bad." I was like, "I know, it kept me up." And then I asked Grant. He was like, "It stormed last night?" I'm just like, "I hate you."
We had lightning strike so close to our house, it set off the car alarms all the way around our street. It was close. I don't know where it struck, but it was really close, and it got my attention for sure. So, yeah. So, I surely, we're kind of on the back end of this little trifecta here. I don't know. So,
old Cody got 1.5 feet of snow and hit up to number -12 in Norman. Yeah, we didn't get 1.5 feet. I measured like 5 inches.
Yeah.
Yeah, 6 inches or so.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting here in shorts this morning.
Oh yeah. Well, a week later, we were walking because the sunshine was out. We were in shorts and t-shirt. I think it jumped 90 degrees in a week.
Right. Monday to Monday, it went -1 to 70.
It's crazy.
Good morning, Lauren. Thank you for being with us out here on, I guess, my Facebook Live group. So, yeah, it's crazy. I don't know. I don't know. It's just so.
So have you guys gotten into, and this is going to be real nerdy, and I know we've just got a minute, but have either of you guys gotten into the NBA Top Shot thing? Have you heard about this? Have you seen this at all? Jeff, you might want to get into this. So it's based off a blockchain. It's technically an NFT, but what it is it's connected to the NBA, and you can buy moments like dunks, 3-pointers, or whatever, and they release very few packs and very few of these moments, and people buy them. And there's some of them that you can buy. The people bought like a pack for like $9, and then there's some of these are sold for hundreds of thousands of dollars.
What are you buying?
You're basically buying a video, but it's kind of like a digital card is to like the best way to explain it. Like sports cards, like instead of a physical pack, it's like a digital pack. Mm-hmm. That's the best way to understand it. But since it's done with this blockchain, they're all unique. So like they can't be replicated. They can't be, all those kind of things. So it is something that you own, kind of like cryptocurrency if anybody's into that. But it's crazy because some people have been buying. I've got into it a little bit. People have been buying it and flipping it. And it's probably going to be a bubble, but it's crazy how these videos, these little short, like 6-second videos have been selling for hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars. It's crazy.
I thought one moment in time was reserved for the end of the NBA March Madness.
Maybe. I mean, I know they're going to – I don't know if they can do stuff at college, but I know they're doing – I mean, it's crazy. Then they can't handle it. Like there's so many people into it now that they've stopped signups for it. And like they'll do packs where they'll be like 5,000 packs, and if they randomly assign you a number, and there's hundreds of thousands of people trying to get it. So I mean, it's Jeff is an investment guy. It's something you might want to look into. It's probably a bubble. I can't imagine it's going to hold its value, but like some of the stuff is crazy.
So if you get something that's really, really unique, like you could have that thing that no one else has. I know we have to go here in a second, but you guys follow the AMC stuff, the short stuff. So it hit 801. So apparently, the big hedge funds have to cover like 14 million shares or something like that on Monday morning. So we'll see what happens. They might have another crazy mess going on.
Well, this whole Top Shot stuff, it's making so much money that I guarantee you, like especially baseball and these other sports, are going to get into it. So y'all just kind of look at it. I hope that this might be Cody, that he misses us.
I don't know.
I hope
Fellas
so.
doesn't seem his language. I want to
It
give a
better not
shout
be
out
a woman.
to Miss Sherry out on my Facebook watch, my sister-in-law. Glad to have you there. So,
Right.
so we're okay. I'm going to sit here and listen to you teach while I try to figure out how we're selling moments in time for profit. So it's
All right, boys.
Brain rattled.
So, like normal, I'll bring you guys back on here in a few minutes. But
Sounds good.
yeah, go get some coffee, refill, and bring you back. All right. Good morning. So, we're going to be in 1 Samuel 17 this morning. I'm going to revisit, a story we've probably all heard many, many times, but I don't know why it was on my heart for this particular week, but it's a story of David and Goliath. So if we'll look at 1 Samuel 17, I want to just pull a few maybe points out of that interaction. And so let me set the scene for you. So in first, where I'm not going to read all of the chapter of 1 Samuel 17, but here we have the Philistine army and the Israel army, and they're getting ready to fight, and they're both kind of squaring off against one another, and kind of what would take place during the day. The armies would come together, they'd all line up for battle, and then there'd be a champion for each army that could, maybe one would come out and challenge the other. And if they fought, the winner would win the whole battle, and everyone would go home. And it saves lives, it saves money, and equipment, and all those type of things. So here we have this standoff that's been taking place for at least 40 days, because we know that Goliath has come out and challenged the army for 40 days, hurling probably insults and, banging his chest and trying to get someone to come out and do battle with him. And, they were, doing this over a long period of time. It says that, Goliath was like over 9.5 feet, 9 feet, 9 inches is what they say. His armor weighed 125 pounds. His spear weighed 16 pounds. The tip of his spear weighed 16 pounds. So he was a beast of a man, and there was probably no one, there was no one who was physically able to challenge him, with size and, strength and, all those type of things. Right. So here we have, in chapter 17, verse 3, it says, the Philistines were standing on the mountain on one side, while Israel was standing on the mountain on the other side, with the valley between them. And then, the champion comes forward again. I'm not going to read that whole section, but that kind of sets the stage. Now, the point that I want us to kind of consider this morning, and when Jimmy and Josh come back on, I may re-ask this in a second, but kind of consider, God's people face sometimes impossible challenges, daunting obstacles, that may be in their way, whether it's physical issues or financial issues or relational issues or whatever that case is. God's people at times face what seems to be hopeless situations, and it makes it difficult sometimes for us to trust God. And here we have God's own army not really trusting in God as they're facing this Philistine army, especially Goliath. So it says in verse 11 that they were afraid when Saul and all Israel heard these words of the Philistine. They were dismayed and they were fearful. So here we have God's army really fearful of what's going on. And the point is that sometimes God's people, you and I, sometimes we fail to trust Him in whatever situation that we are in, especially when it's maybe a threatening situation, not really threatening to our life, but maybe threatening to our livelihood, or threatening to maybe our families, or whatever the case is. So they were afraid to come out and face, Goliath. And why didn't they just send out 10 soldiers to fight Goliath, or why didn't they just leave? Well, it was a matter of, honor at the time, right? They were being challenged sort of mano a mano, and they didn't have anyone to kind of do that. So at times, God's people, we are to stand up against those Goliaths that are in our lives. So Jimmy and Josh, I want you to think about, when I call you back on, this is one of the things I want us to talk about, is what are some of today's really challenges? We're definitely living in, a challenging time over the last, 12 to 15 months, right? So I want to talk about some of that, and maybe how we can talk about how God can help guide us through those particular things. That's one thing that I want us to talk about. Okay. Uh, so let's look now at verse 26, 17, verse 26. In between this time, David's brothers went off to war, his three older brothers. David was tending the flock. His father wanted him to go take some food out to the army. So, he takes care of what he needs to take care of at home. He gathers stuff. He takes stuff to his brothers. And when he gets there, the two armies are aligned, and he hears this guy out there yelling at Saul's army. And so David hears what Goliath is saying. Verse 26. Let me get this real quick. It says, for who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he has dared to defy the armies of the living God? So when Goliath comes out and starts taunting the army and looking for someone to come do battle with him, there's really no one that steps up to the challenge. And this goes on for 40 days. And it says that, the soldiers were fearful. David comes up and saying, who is this guy? So what I want to maybe talk about, or put in our minds this morning, is maybe the perspective that David had. So we have to remember that David was a shepherd. David had already, fought a lion, had already fought a bear. And I don't know about you, but lions and bears are pretty ferocious. And I know that Goliath was a pretty big dude, but David's perspective is, it's not that he's so strong that he's able to take on a lion and bear. It's that God delivered him from the lion and the bear. He was able to take care of his flock, and he was able to, get through those particular challenges. So David's perspective was maybe a little bit different. What he saw was simply a mortal man out there defying God, and he was a little, I don't know if he was ticked or not, but I'll say maybe he was a little ticked at the fact that no one has actually put him in his place yet. So he goes to Saul. Saul, says he's too young, he's too little to do all this, and he says, well, I fought the lion and the bear. I'm paraphrasing really, really quick because I want to get Jimmy and Josh back on here on the time that we have. But so he talks to Saul in verses 20. 30, 33, 30, 31 or so. So when the words of David is, they get back to Saul, and David says, hey, may no one's heart fall on account on him. Your servant will go and fight the Philistine. But Saul said to David, you are not able to go against this Philistine to fight him, for you are only a youth, while he has been a warrior since his youth. But David said, your servant was tending his father's sheep when a lion and bear came and took the sheep from the flock, and he ends up, killing him. So he says, David's perspective is, I can do anything with God on my side. And this is just another man. This is just a man. Goliath, he's a big man, but this is just a man. So David's perspective was a little bit different, and he was seeing the situation from God's point of view and not necessarily his point of view. So viewing impossible situations from God's point of view is kind of the point that I want us to talk about when you guys come back on. It helps us get through those problems. It helps us put ourselves in the right mindset and look at things through the right perspective. And at times we make our problems bigger than God, in our own mind. And then in 28 through 32, one of the things that David had to had to deal with was, the criticism from his brothers, the criticism from the other folks. It's who are you to kind of think that you can go out and face this giant? But that criticism did not stop David. It did not deter him from having the proper perspective and seeing the situation from God's point of view. So what I'll say here is that, as we tackle our problems as Christians, as we face our challenges as Christians, sometimes the world's not going to actually understand it. Sometimes, our own families and our own friends are going to maybe criticize or maybe deter us or trying to get us to do something different. But David was steadfast in his persistence. So it didn't matter that people were trying to cancel him out there. It was that he was going to actually do what God wanted him to do. So, and then maybe the last point that I'll touch on here, and then we'll revisit some of these things in a couple minutes, is that David's past experiences gave him the confidence to face this giant. We've already talked about that he faced, the lion, the bear, and I don't know who I'd rather challenge, a 9-foot man or a bear. I don't know, but David understood that it wasn't that David was cocky. It was that David understood that God had already brought him through some other challenges. So he was able to kind of look back and say, and take encouragement from the fact that God has been faithful in the past. He's going to be faithful today as well. And he had that confidence about him. Was David confident or overconfident? I'll say he was confident because God gave him past successes. David placed his faith fully in God. It says he went to the stream and he picked up 5 stones for his sling. He was a marksman. David knew what his strengths were, and his strength was not wearing the armor that Saul asked him to wear. He said, listen, I haven't trained with this. It was too heavy. It was too bulky. He really couldn't be David by putting on someone else's, solution to the problem. He had to face a solution with the skill sets that God gave him. And so he was certainly a marksman. He pulls these 5 stones. Jimmy and Josh, I'll ask you why he chose 5 stones. So maybe you think about that. And what I'll suggest, a couple things. One, God never promised him that he would fall, Goliath with a single shot. Right. So maybe he was just kind of being diligent and being prepared, or maybe David said, okay, I'm going to take Goliath out with 1. And if there's anyone in the army that was really a close friend of Goliath, they may charge me. So I'll have 4 more. He already knew that the army behind him was already running, that they were pretty scared. Or maybe it was because, Goliath had 4 brothers, let's talk about, maybe he said, okay, his family is going to come after me, so I'll be ready. So maybe we'll talk about, those things. But, the point here is God's deliverance. God does deliver his people through problems. Sometimes it's not the way that, we want it to be done or we expect it to be done, but we do face threatening situations. We do face, impossible hurdles sometimes that we think are impossible in our lives. Certain situations that are going on in the world, and how do we face those things? And Saul was facing, I guess, what he thought an impossible challenge at the time, and the least likely person came along and helped solve the problem. David was probably the least likely person that anyone would have picked out of a crowd to actually go fight Goliath. But, the funny thing is that, it says that David ran towards the battle. It says that when it was time for him to, after they, David and Goliath, they get together and they both kind of insult each other's armies. Goliath says, am I a dog that you're going to bring a stick to this fight? Type thing. And, David starts talking about, Goliath's swords and all this kind of stuff that it really doesn't matter when you're facing God. But when it was time to do battle, he ran towards the situation, and he took that stone out and he put it in his sling, and in one shot hit him right between the eyes and felled him. And then he also did what he said he was going to do. He was going to cut off his head, and he did with Goliath's own sword. So David's victory of Goliath meant that not only is God, in control, but it also showed others around him that hey, this least likely individual has just failed our champion, and word of that would take place. And I would submit to you that most people would probably say it has to be a God thing, because if you looked at David and you looked at Goliath, there's no way physically that he could have really taken care of that of that challenge. And then David's victory also gave confidence to those around him. And isn't it so true that when a believer in your life has a victory over something, how that gives you and I confidence as well? So a few points for the story. I'd like Josh and Jimmy to come back on and maybe give a couple thoughts on David and Goliath, and maybe the first thing we can talk about is what are some of the challenges that we face today. It's not what are the giants that we can face today that seem almost unsurmountable.
Well, I wrote an opening statement. This is what I wrote: patience in the preparation and the wisdom to recognize our value in changing a world we are called to touch on our way to eternity with God. Patience, preparation, recognition of value, and being striving to be what the Lord would have us to be on our way to being with Him.
I just can't imagine David walking in the middle of this army, hearing the challenges put forth by Goliath, and he just, who is this guy? What, I'll do it.
Yeah.
Have you had anyone in your life that just really surprised you and said, "Oh, I'll do it"?
I think about the like 18-year-olds went and fought in World War II to defeat the Nazis or whatever. They're like, hey, they can't do that stuff. We'll go fight them. Yeah,
it's amazing thing. And David's perspective that he had, trusting in God came from those past experiences. As believers, what I would challenge us to say when we're facing, this past year's been crazy. There's been a lot of stuff, loss of jobs, can't find work, people isolated and, not able to, for those that have to have company, this has been a pretty challenging time over the past year. There's those of us that, we could care less if we see anyone or not, but, we're a little bit more comfortable. But, there's some people that are struggling, just through that whole relational aspect, financial aspect, physical aspect, whatever the case is. COVID has touched so many individuals through sickness or death. And then we have all the other things that are going on, whether it be cancer, whether it be heart disease, or whether it be mental, disease or whatever. So, the losses have been piling up, if you will. So, David's past, he understood that he could get through this particular issue, not only because God is faithful and he can do it, but he leaned on, he remembered where God had brought him from and what God had brought him through before. And I think as believers, sometimes we forget when we're facing a challenge, what God did for us in the past.
Well, and I think David also illustrates, like many of the the biblical heroes, is God had not promised him victory over the Philistine, but God had promised that there is blessings in faithfulness. And so David was faithful. Now, he was confident, but he was faithful, not knowing. God had not clearly dictated the outcome of this encounter. And that's part of the challenge we face even today is, we don't know how things are going to turn out. And God says there's blessings in being faithful in what you do know and trusting me for what you don't know. And even if it doesn't go the way that you want it to go, there's power and purpose, in that. And to your question about the stones, I've read and am fairly confident that the 5 stones was because he had four brothers.
Mm-hmm.
So he was loading up to take out the whole family if necessary. So, but,
well, when you're talking about, Goliaths, obviously, and I think you kind of touched on it towards the end, the real challenge here was God, the God of Israel versus the gods of the Philistines. I mean, that's what the champions represented. I mean, that's why the Philistine army fled. It wasn't because they were afraid of the Jewish army, of the Israelite army. It's because when they saw that their champion lost to Israel's champion, that meant that their gods were not as powerful or powerful enough to take over Israel's God. So similarly, I think that's the same challenge we have today when we're talking about Goliaths. Is the question is always, who do you believe in? Who is more powerful? Is our God is the true God, our God more powerful, or whatever the world is offering, whatever philosophy or religion or strategy or whatever, is that more powerful? I think that's what we're always kind of battling with as far as Goliaths, and sometimes it's not so clear cut as like other gods. Sometimes it's other good things. We're talking about challenging for the church. It's okay. Well, who are you going to give your time, your talent, your treasures, as Jimmy always mentions too, because there's plenty of quote unquote good things, but if that's not what God wants you to do, if that's not God's best for you, then it might as well be an idol. It might as well be another God, because you're following someone that you shouldn't be following. And I think there's a lot of empty religions and philosophies and business strategies, whatever it is, that are kind of couched under these good kind of terms, but it's not our God. It's not Jesus. It's not Christianity. It's not the best. And so I think that's probably, whenever I see Christians that are too into X, whatever it is, they're caught up too much into politics, or they're caught too much into this conspiracy theory, or they're caught up too much in this other hobby or passion, that it hurts their witness for Christ, then that to me is giving into the Goliath.
Yeah. And one point as I was going through this, and I kind of, one thing that came out, and I don't know if this is theologically correct. You can tell me if it is or not. One of you two can tell me. But, David walks into the situation. It had been going on for some time. That was a situation of the day. These armies, facing off with one another. There's a lot of people around, but David walks into the situation, assesses it, if you will, or understands that, what's going on. And then he's the person that steps up and raises his hand and says, you know what? I will do something about this. I will carry this torch. I will combat this problem. I will fall this giant, or fell this giant? I will fell this giant. So for us as believers, is there a situation, a circumstance, something going on where God may be asking you to be the David in that situation? When I was reading this, that's kind of, one of the points that came out when I was studying this was, where does God want me to be David? Not arrogant, not, stick out my chest and, beat it like, Goliath is doing, but where does he want me to be faithful? Of course, he wants me to be faithful. He wants me to trust him in all things. Don't get me wrong. But is there a particular situation where you may be the David that God is wanting to use? Not that he needs, that he's wanting to use. So do we need to step up to the challenge?
Well, it could be big giants, like in a workplace or in a family, being the spiritual voice in a family. But I think sometimes, I don't know if I want to say smaller giants, but it could be also in a church when there's a need, and it might be a need that you're a part of that need, and you simply step up and go, well, I'll do it. I'll do my very best, and we've seen that countless times, over the years, and we're going to need to see that going forward. Once, life gets back to normal. I mean, whatever that word means right now, but there's a lot of work to be done, and we're going to need Davids to step up and go to work, go to battle for the hearts, the minds, and the souls of humanity.
Yeah.
And you see here, go ahead, Jeff.
No, go ahead.
Well, and you see the challenge. There's a clear and direct challenge to God. Like Goliath is basically saying, your God isn't real, or at least that your God isn't as powerful as my God's. And so I think we have to be careful sometimes when, we're talking about giants, because I think sometimes Christians have gone after giants that turn out to be windmills. It's like we need to be clear that the giants are a clear and direct attack on the truth of God, on who God is, on the character of God. And unfortunately, those giants can sometimes be found in the church, like Jimmy's saying. They can be found all over the place. But I think our culture is a constant war. I can only speak to our culture because that's what I live in, but the American culture is constantly saying your God isn't real, or he's not as powerful as he says he is. This actually is secular humanism, whatever it is. This is actually the truth. This is the real God. And that's what we need to spend I think a vast majority of our energy fighting, is that challenge that to who God is. And sometimes it can be kind of subtle, and sometimes it can be, come from the church. I mean, there's churches out there that call themselves churches that don't even believe in like the deity of Christ, or don't even believe in the resurrection, or believe this like universalism that, everybody's going to get into heaven or whatever it is. Like there's there's challenges from all sides. So I think there's plenty of Goliaths to fight without coming up with fake ones.
And I think we're right now going to be facing some cultural challenges to some of the most basic beliefs of biblical teaching, and one of them being that God created man and he created woman. We are living right now where there's significant talk and effort to try to redefine in our culture that that's not true. Well, it is true. And we need to hold a bit. Why is it true? Well, God says it's true. The Bible says it. And but there are giants in the land, make no doubt. And I believe the contrast, just like, standing on the hillsides opposite one another, seeing the contrast between David and Goliath, I believe the contrast between the church and the world on some fronts are becoming more distinct by the hour.
Yeah. So I could take this hand grenade and throw it right in here. And we've got a few minutes, but I do want to, one of the challenges out there, you mentioned Cassie being a member now working for Rafa, which is awesome. That our church supports Rafa Clinic, and I'm a part of that. If you come from Rockwall, I believe coming into Greenville, you'll see a billboard that says "Abortion Saves Lives." I believe is what it says. It's there by the Church of Satan, which has got their logo right there. So let me tell you what's going on, and sort of one of the movements now is that, young lady, if you want to get an abortion, you can join our church, because one of the sacred rights of our church is abortion. So when we talk about the rights of the church, and here we have this Church of Satan saying, hey, this is just like communion to someone else, or baptism, or some other right within the church. This is, you join our church, you claim this right, and now it's a biblical right, or it's a protected right. So that is what's going on in America today. There's a movement there with that to try and get around some of the things. Now, you go fight that, but now you're attacking the church as a whole and the rights of every church, every person to worship the way they want to worship. The rights of, so this can be a slippery slope, but just Christian, just please get your head up and open your eyes to some of the things that are going around, in this world today. Read a few things, and we need Jesus. That's the bottom line. We don't need legislation. We need Jesus.
Well, and some of those things, that you see like that, where there's kind of clear and open, to me, those things are easier to deal with than the subtle stuff that sinks to the church. How many times have we seen a church kind of be overturned by something internal thing, by some, rogue pastor, or some scandal or something like that? It's like, those challenges to the church that you're talking about definitely need to be dealt with. But those are clear and obvious, when you've got, you know what I mean? Not that we don't need to pay attention, but sometimes I think we think it's always out there trying to get in here. And it seems like we need to be just as vigilant about the stuff seeping into our church. Do we love each other? Do we care for each other? Is there something happening? Are people like in love with sin? Are people too cozy with the world? What is happening inside the church? Because I would say that I've seen more people in churches fall from something within than a clear something without. If you look at even in David's story, the problem isn't Goliath. The problem that none of them believe that God can defeat him. That when David comes in and he's challenging, he's like, why are you guys letting this guy challenge you? Well, we're afraid of Goliath. Well, they don't have faith in God. And I think a lot of times we see those kind of issues where, it's easier to identify these kind of outside in the world issues and challenges and stuff. It's harder to take a look at ourselves and our churches and go, do we believe in God? Do we have faith in God? Do we love each other? Are we ministering to the poor and the sick and the needy like we're supposed to? So I think we need that tension.
Or is your church even a place where someone can come and feel loved, even though they don't even believe?
Sure.
Because love is love and kindness and all those things. Now, we don't sacrifice the sake of the gospel for a
secret thing or whatever,
or anything like that. But yeah, still, where can they go to find comfort and love? But anyway, just that's one of the things I wanted to throw out there. And the one thing I'll say, I 100% agree with what you're saying, Josh. I don't disagree at all. But what I'll say is, the world, it's used to these things would be kind of hidden behind, a Planned Parenthood or
sure.
a doctor or, some other movement that's sort of veiled in something else. But now it's right there in the open. So we live in a world now where everything's just out in the open.
Right?
Yeah. So, but maybe that's easy to.
Well, and you're exactly right. We live in a nation that affords us certain freedoms that we need to be mindful of, but it's the same contest. It is, like I mentioned in my opening statement, is the value. Where does your value lie? And that is in those of us who are already born and those that are yet to be born. And our society has nibbled at the edges for years. And and now those at the earliest stage of life and those at the latter stage of life are considered inconveniences. Well, that's a lie of the devil. Mm-hmm. Each of those have value in God's kingdom. Each of those have value in our society. And the unfortunate problem is that not only are we nibbling at the edges, but now a portion of our society doesn't have a value for life in the middle of life. That's the reason people will give them away every day and spend their entire lives in prison or risk these things. Mm-hmm. People need to understand, and we need to get back to the value of life, each and every one. And I'm going to go back to what you said, Josh, is as believers, that value is not determined by whether they agree with us or that we even like them. The value is determined because God said they're valuable. The cross says they're valuable. And if Jesus says so, then that is our mandate. And if you can't or will not accept the mandate, then you probably need to keep your mouth shut.
Right.
Or go to the cross and see if you're actually a believer. Because if you cannot love people, you may not have met the master of love.
Well, that's exactly right. And I think we've got to do both. We have to rail. You can rail against abortion, and that's half the battle. You also need to adopt babies. We also need to foster children. Like there's this kind of double burden. I know Rafa does a good job with it. It's like let's stop them from having abortions. Okay, well, how are we going to take care of the 16-year-old that's scared and doesn't know what to do? We as a church have to do both. We can't just rail against sin. We have to come around and nurture and care for and take care of these people. Because it's easy to kind of point out, well, that's this sin, that's sin, that's sin. Well, how are you going to deal with it? How are you going to solve it? How are you going to fix it? How are you going to love people through it? That's the messy part. That's the tough part. Mm-hmm. It's easy to say that's wrong. It's harder to actually step up to the plate like David and fight Goliath.
Yeah, and actually get your hands and feet
Yeah.
involved. So, all right. So we got 2 points for today's message. One is love you some people.
Amen.
Amen. There and God's provision is perfect, as Jared points out in his comment there. God's provision for us is perfect. See things from God's point of view. Have David's perspective in our situations, and I would encourage you to lean on your past experiences where God has brought you through certain things, and as a believer, and remember that God is bigger than the God of the world. So there you go. Close us out, brother.
All right. Well, thank you guys. Thank you to everyone for being here. And it is true. In an ever-changing world, we serve a consistent and persistent God. And I validate your frustration. I validate your sense of insecurity at times. But we have to, like Jeff said, look in the rearview mirror of life to see that God has been faithful, not only in your life, but in the lives of countless millions over the span of hundreds and thousands of years. And if he's been faithful that long, then he will be faithful going forward. The challenge that you and I face is, what does our faithfulness to him look like in a world where the target seems to move? So let's learn and love the Lord, and then let's love others as we love ourselves. And if we can do those two things at a very high level, then we'll begin to accomplish a great deal for what God's plan is for you and I in his kingdom. I hope that you're well, and I hope that you're having a good day. I hope that you're planning to get up, potty up, fill up your coffee cup, and come back here in about 10 minutes or so for the morning worship service, like I will be for the first time ever here in my home. And we will enjoy a time of worship and study together. I hope that you're well. Hope that you have a great week. And as always, let's all strive to be a part of the answer and not part of the problem. Until we're together again, may the Lord bless you and keep you. We'll see you soon.